poetry show where the name explains itself. I am Micah Cousins, poetry PhD.
And I'm Professor Thew. And today we're talking about...
Lord Byron.
Lord Byron.
The one and only.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there have been several Lord Byrons, but the one we're talking about today is the most famous.
Yes, George Gordon, Lord Byron.
Right. And I know that there's like a million different places where you can learn about his biography, and we do mostly want to focus on his first major poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. But in order to understand that, you have to understand a little bit about his background and biography. So we are going to start off with just a little bit about that.
Oh, I mean, we love gushing over the stories of poets anyway, so...
I mean, with Lord, I've read a few biographies of Lord Byron, and there's always just so much to talk about, because he was a very wealthy man who had a lot of time on his hands to just get in trouble. So, I mean, there is so much scandal to discuss and to talk about, but we do want to keep it poetry focused, so we're always going to be pulling it back to the poetry, because that's our specialty, that's what we're passionate about. Again, the clue is in the name. But the poem that we're talking about today, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, is arguably extremely autobiographical.
Ooh, okay.
And in its fourth canto of the poem, he basically says that, you know, there is whatever line there was initially between him and the protagonist of the poem has basically dissipated. So, again, it's really important to understand his biographical background in order to understand the poem. So, that's where we're going to start.
All right. And with Byron, we've decided his life and his legacy is so big that we can't contain this just one episode.
No, we're going to have to do at least 2, maybe 3.
We're doing a sequel or a series, so yeah, watch out for the next ones.
Exactly. And again, there's so many places you can learn more about him. And we don't claim to be historians or anything like that. Again, we're mostly poetry people. We're passionate about poetry. But I have read a few biographies about him. Some of the details conflict, though, and I'm happy to be corrected. So if there's something that I get wrong, please just let us know.
Yeah, let us know. All right, so where are we starting with Byron? What things do you feel are relevant to talk about?
Well, we could start, with his birth, which is in 1788, but I would argue we need to start even a little bit further back than that, because he is a peer of the realm, he is an aristocrat, and I'm American, so I don't really understand how the aristocracy works in Britain, but apparently pedigree is very important.
Okay.
So, because his family arguably has this curse on them, because they got their money and land initially as some sort of fluke. Because when King Henry VIII, the one that liked to behead his wives, and decided to sever England from the Catholic Church in order to get with Anne Boleyn, when he decided to do that, obviously all the Catholic priories and monks and convents in England suddenly had no source of funding, and he was like, you guys have to leave. So you had this mass exodus, and all of this property, this Catholic Church property, was stripped from the church, and King Henry was like, I've got all this stuff now to give away to people that I like. And who was one of those people?
Oh.
Lord Byron's ancestor.
Okay.
Who got Newstead Abbey, which wasn't actually an abbey, it was a priory, which I don't know exactly what that means, but apparently it is slightly different than an abbey. Anyway, it was this castle thing that apparently there was this curse on it. This is folklore, I obviously haven't been there, don't know if it's true. Because the monks were forced to leave against their own will.
Okay.
So how gothic is that Lord Byron's ancestral home is this cursed abbey that's not even an abbey, it was a priory. And anyway, in order to convert it into a functioning family home, the Byrons boarded up some of the larger rooms, and so that this exterior portion of the abbey, which again was not really an abbey, starts to disintegrate.
I'm assuming that they call it an abbey, and that's why you keep calling it an abbey?
Yeah, they call it an abbey.
Okay.
You type in Newstead Abbey, but it's confusing because it didn't ever function as an abbey. Anyway.
Sure.
But again, it's so gothic because it's you've got this old castle, arguably haunted and cursed. The exterior portion is disintegrating and being overrun with this sort of natural wildlife that's reclaiming it. And Anyway, this is Lord Byron's ancestral home, but he doesn't inherit it until he's 10, and I'm going to get into that in just a minute. But his great uncle was the one who inherited, the one before Lord Byron who inherited this property. But Lord Byron's grandfather was known as Foul-Weather Jack because he was apparently on a number of bad seagoing enterprises, arguably during which period they got stranded and he, had to commit cannibalism to survive.
Wow.
That's allegedly, I don't know if that really happened or not, but that was the rumor when he returned to England that had happened. And his great uncle, from whom Lord Byron would one day inherit the peerage, he was a complicated figure. There were a number of riots in London during which he would, barrel down the streets on horseback, like cutting rioters down with a sword. There were lots of rumors about him, one that he killed his wife, one that he liked to organize orgies in Newstead Abbey, one that he killed his coachman, like shot him dead. I don't know if any of that's true, but I think it says something that those rumors were allowed to proliferate, because obviously people thought that he could be capable of doing these things.
Yeah.
So that's his great uncle, from whom he inherits the peerage. Now his dad, I'm going to psychoanalyze Byron a little bit here.
Okay.
Because Byron's most important family relationship, arguably, is with his mother. His mother was abandoned shortly after giving birth to Byron because his father was a gigolo. His father had been the son of Foul-Weather Jack, and the son racked up a lot of gambling debts, as an Englishman with no practical life skills, what does one do when you have a lot of gambling debts? You turn to prostitution. So that was his way of getting money. He did marry once before he had married Lord Byron's mother. He got married to a marchioness who ran off from her husband. And then apparently he was extremely abusive to her. They had 3 children together. The first 2 died. The third one survived, named Augusta. And Lord Byron later had an incestuous relationship with her. But again, we'll save that for another episode, I think.
Okay.
So that family, that first wife, that first marriage is abandoned by Lord Byron's father. He turns to prostitution to get a little bit of money. And then his first wife dies, some say of a broken heart. There was some sort of, I think, complicating illness. But then the Lord Byron now has this money stream cut off. Like, he's cut off from his family. And then his first wife again has died, arguably because of his ill treatment of her.
And we're talking about
Lord Byron's dad.
Okay, excellent.
Who, again, he never really knew. Because after this first marriage of his dad's went kaput, he turns to prostitution, and then he thinks, why don't I just marry a desperate heiress? So he goes to Bath, which was the place where he went to get, I guess, hooked up with a rich heiress back in the day. And he sees...
I mean, that's so appropriate with the tale of the wife of Bath, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. Chaucer was ahead of time. Yeah. But Byron's mother was there, and she was apparently very provincial. Like, she didn't... Like, gullible. She didn't understand... I don't know, this worldly man who was suddenly showing this interest in her. And apparently she wasn't conventionally attractive. She's described in really heartbreaking terms, like really cruelly. Like, she's apparently described as being fat and having this waddling gait. And just like really mean. I guess in the Regis area it was perfectly acceptable to just call people fat, but they did. And so she marries him against the advice of all of her friends. They're like, don't do this. But she says that she's in love. And so she marries him, and then he soon starts depleting all of her money.
No.
Because that's the only reason he married her. She claims that they were in love, but I think his motives quickly became clear, And she had to sell a lot of her property to even start selling off a portion of his gambling debts because he'd racked up so much. And then she does get pregnant with Byron, so they must have consummated the marriage at some point. But he eventually kind of has enough because they have a very hard life of poverty because, again, they had to sell so much of her property to even begin to pay off a portion of his debts. So he flees to France, and he takes up rooms in a brothel, And then he starts an affair with his sister because she has money. So he's sort of prostituting himself to his sister, and then he dies.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, again, Byron doesn't really remember his dad. But it's weird, though, because he kind of blames his mom for his dad never being around, and I don't get that. Like,
sure.
His mom is trying to do the... I mean, she was a very flawed woman, too, but she was trying to do the best she could. I mean, after paying off the dad's debts, like, they were legitimately impoverished. There was nothing she really could do as a woman in that period. So they started, like, they took up residence, like, living above a shop.
I think women are often blamed for, like, their husbands leaving. Like, oh, you couldn't keep a man satisfied.
Yeah.
Or, you know, just, like, these sexist excuses.
And maybe also because she was the parent that was around. Like, he saw all her flaws up close. Whereas his dad, he could kind of romanticize a little bit. Because his dad had been a very handsome man in his day. And he had, again, these two affairs. One with a previous wife and then this affair. And he had been, you know, a scandalous but exciting figure. So maybe as a young boy or a young man, it's easier to, I don't know, want to be associated with this romantic, scandalous figure versus your mother whose flaws you see on a daily basis.
Sure,
I don't
sure.
know. I'm psychoanalyzing into this part. But
well, that's the fun of literature.
yeah. But again, Lord Byron's life is so paradoxical. Like, it's really hard for me to understand, especially as an American, because there's so many contradictions. Because he's this very wealthy man, but he's in debt for most of his life. First because of his father's debts and his great-uncle's debts. But again, also, he seemingly has access to all this stuff just because he's a peer of the realm. He's fatherless, but he's always defined by his father. He's extremely close to his mother, but despises his mother. He's arguably one of the most famous British people ever to have lived, but he despises Britain. He's homosexual. We'll get to that in a minute, but he's known mostly for his affairs with women. Maybe he's bisexual. I don't know that they had that term exactly, but
Sure.
anyway, just lots of contradictions that I have a hard time making sense of in my own mind, because a lot of his attributes seem inconsistent to me, but again, I don't really understand British aristocracy. I don't really understand what it must have been like to live in that time period, because his life changes, like, radically overnight. Again, for the first 10 years of his childhood, he's living above a shop in poverty with his mother, and they have this very strict Calvinist nursemaid with whom he's sent to live at one point. And again, she's very religious, she's extremely strict, but she also is sexually abusive to him. And so, again, one of those contradictions, it's like...
How old was he when that happened?
Probably 10 or 11. So it's like, he associates religion with sexuality, but
Sure.
also with blatant hypocrisy and evil. And then he kind of writes about it vaguely later in his life. He says his passions had developed early, which I think is what he's referring to. I don't know. So that's got to be, again, such like a weird tension of associating religion with sex and sexual pleasure, but then also shame and abuse, and I don't know. I mean, that's got to have affected him, though.
Yeah, absolutely. So how old was he when he wrote this first great poem of his?
Not for a few years, because after he inherited his great-uncle's title, he was 10 at that point. So that's when they move into the Newstead Abbey, and suddenly, overnight, he's a peer of the realm. No longer just the grubby, chubby little boy that lives above the shop with his mother and his disgraced father's death kind of looming in the background. Suddenly, again, overnight, he's noble. And he's got this bright future, and he's sent to, like, Harrow boarding school, and he's sent to Cambridge, and he lives, you know, this very exciting life, again, of an aristocratic nobleman. Which, again, is night and day from his first 10 years of his life.
Right.
Not that he was like apprenticed in a coal factory or not coal factory, like a coal mine or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But still, he did not grow up rich for those first few years. And then all of a sudden, he is rich. But he's also in debt because, again, his father's gambling debts, and the abbey is not in great shape. His great uncle was too busy having orgies and killing people, apparently, to do a lot of DIY work on the property.
Oh, what a shame! What a shame! Gotta get your priorities straight.
Yeah. DIY, then murder.
That's right. That's the order, everyone. It's alphabetical.
Yeah. Anyway, so after Cambridge, I guess his life. Well, okay. At Cambridge, he had a number of like homosexual relationships, which again, I'm gonna psychoanalyze him, but I think he didn't have a lot of great examples of like healthy heterosexual relationships in his life. I think he always associated like relationships with men as being purer, and more truly loving. But homosexuality at that time in Britain was illegal, right? Like you could go to jail or be imprisoned for sodomy, is what they called it, I guess.
So it's hard to imagine that he idealized it when he was in a culture that demonized it.
Yeah. But then, again, after Cambridge, what do I do with my life? Again, he's sort of this dissolute aristocrat who got a reputation at Cambridge for having a bear. The college didn't allow dogs as pets, and he got so mad he brought a bear. He was
amazing.
Because the rules didn't explicitly forbid a bear. Anyway, he's had these relationships with men, but they haven't really gone anywhere because they can't really go anywhere. There's no future, for that. Not at that time. And so he's like, I guess I'll do the aristocratic thing, which is to travel, to do the grand tour of Europe. So he takes Hop House. Hop House is like, I don't know how to describe it. Because everybody says, opposites attract, because Hop House was very solemn, whereas Byron was more eccentric and flamboyant.
Was Hop House like a friend of his in college? Or?
Yeah, he was a friend in college. They started out as enemies because they seemed so different, but they're both very interested in history, and I guess it was sort of an opposites attract situation.
Oh, nice.
Hop House was no angel. He got up to some trouble too. But he's had more of a sense of, like, cultural propriety than Byron did. I think Byron's biographers don't love Hop House because Hop House censored a lot of Byron's personal papers and was like, you cannot write that down. If you did that, burn that. He burned a lot of Byron's personal, like, journals and stuff because Byron's one virtue, aside from his poetry, was his lack of hypocrisy. You could make this argument. Because he would say, well, a lot of English nobles are in relationships with men. They just don't talk about it. He said, I just want to talk about it. I just want to be honest about it. And lots of people do have affairs. They just don't talk about it. And lots of noblemen especially, do have really messy ancestry. Again, they just don't talk about it. So you could argue that his one virtue was his honesty, which kind of made him a star because during this grand tour, again, they're doing the whole English nobleman abroad, him and Hop House, or Lord Byron and Hop House. And they start in Spain, and then they go to Albania, and they go to Greece, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But he starts writing Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. He had written some poetry before, some verse as he called it, and again, this is very hard for me as an American to understand, like, it was frowned upon for aristocrats to have, like, a job.
Right. It's such like a, not upper class, but like, such a monarchical thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I when I was on my study abroad in Spain, it was often talked about as well. Like, if someone had to toil for their sustenance, it made them dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It meant they weren't really gentlemen.
Yeah, which is so weird.
It seems so weird to me. But he had written stuff, but it got really badly reviewed, so he was like, screw England, like, I'm going abroad, Again, he's a very famous Englishman who despises the English, anyway. So he again, is on this tour, and he starts writing these verses about his travels. And I want to emphasize, like, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage consists of 4 cantos, meaning, like, 4 main sections. I don't think the first 2 are any good. They're the 2 that made him famous. But they're not... Again, they're not nearly as mature and interesting as the 3rd and 4th. I just think it's night and day. Like, the 1st and 2nd feel to me like a very young person figuring out their style. Mm-hmm. And then the 3rd and 4th, again, I feel like are so much more mature. But I understand why the first 2 made him famous. Because he's very sexy. Like, I mean by that, like, it's not smut, it's not that. What I mean is that he has this Byronic persona down to a T. And I think the Byronic hero, again, what he cultivated and what is named after him is this, how would you describe it? Like...
shoot. There's, like, a specific word that goes with it, I feel like.
It's like this...
Brood. Yeah, brooding.
Sort of existential angst. You feel like you're cursed. It's sort of like Satan's in Paradise Lost, right?
Right.
You feel like you're cut off from God. And as a woman, even reading it all these years later, I'm like, oh, that's really sexy. Like, he's so brooding. He's so determined to be outside of salvation. Like, there's some pieces I wanted to read just because it's... I don't know how to describe it, really. But I want to see if, as a man, it has the same effect on you. But I see...
I'm a bisexual man, so it might have a different sort of effect than we're looking for.
I don't know. I'm curious. But, like, so, again, this is from the first canto, which is about, like, his travels in Spain. And I want to emphasize, initially, he wanted Childe Harold, who's the protagonist, to be distinct from him. He's like, this is a persona, this isn't me. But by the 4th canto, that's gone out the window. He's like, it's me. I'm basically writing by myself. But this is say, smile not at my sullen brow. Alas, I cannot smile again. Yet heaven avert that ever thou shouldst weep, and haply weep in vain. And dost thou ask what secret woe I bear, corroding joy and youth? And wilt thou vainly seek to know a pang, even thou must fail to soothe? It is not love, it is not hate, nor low ambition's honours lost that bids me loathe my present state, and fly from all I prize the most. It is that weariness which springs from all I meet, or hear, or see. To me no pleasure beauty brings, thine eyes have scarce a charm for me. It is that settled, ceaseless gloom that will not look beyond the tomb. I guess just aristocratic ennui. Like,
yeah, I guess so.
Purposelessness. And then earlier he's like, my heritage is cursed. Another important part that I failed to bring in and should have earlier was that he had a club foot.
Oh, yeah, I think I did hear about that.
He also blamed his mother for that because she couldn't afford the treatment for it when he was little. But why couldn't she afford the treatment for it?
Because the father
took all their money. But Lord Byron always blamed her for it. Even though deep down I think he knew. You know, it wasn't her fault, really.
Right.
But I guess... I don't think it's fair to say that, like... I don't know if he truly believed that it was cursed. I don't know that he really believed that he was cursed. Because sometimes I think, oh, that was just a performance to make himself sound melodramatic. I don't know that he really felt that God hated him. But then there's part of me that's like, I don't know. Again, is he trying to just seem wounded and, I don't know, melancholy to be dramatic?
I mean, how old was he when he wrote this?
18, 19.
Oh, I bet he was just feeling that way.
He was in his feelings.
I feel like when you're young like that, like, those emotions can be so powerful.
Yeah.
So many people have so many expectations of you and hopes for you. Yeah. I mean, shoot, that's why emo music resonated with me so much. That's the vibe I'm getting from Byron right now. He is a 19th century proto-emo.
Uh-huh. Well,
a bit more eloquent.
Well, again, a lot of the time, I think people skate over the political aspects of these first two cantos because his Byronic persona, like when he reflects on himself, it's more interesting. Because the political stuff, I don't understand. Like this first one, he's talking about how Spain has been oppressed, and again, as like a 21st century American, I have no idea what 19th century Spanish history consists of. Yeah. Unfortunately. So he's talking about all this political stuff, and number one, it comes across as a little strange because I don't know that he himself was as knowledgeable as he thought he was about that subject.
Sure.
But also, again, as an American, I'm very ignorant of it. So I think that that's a lesson maybe that I took away from this as a poet. Like, commenting on history or on current events is interesting, but it loses its relevance really quickly to future readers. Because, again, I have no idea what he's talking about.
Right.
But okay. Another thing that he does that's quite sexy, I think, is he gives himself this sort of mythical persona. And again, the line between him and this protagonist, Childe Harold, is like paper thin, which he dispenses with completely by the fourth canto. He's like, "Below in Albion's isle," that means just Britain, "there dwelt a youth, who never in virtue's ways did take delight, but spent his days in riot most uncouth. Then vexed with mirth the drowsy ear of night, he was a shameless wight, given sore to revel and ungodly glee." And then he just goes through this full list of all the things he's done. He's like, yeah, I like to whore around. He's like, I like to go to brothels. I like to do all this stuff. Which I guess poets didn't do so much back then. Maybe.
Right, like, coming from our perspective, like, we've seen so many confessional poets. So much confessional poetry. So he's kind of the proto-confessional poet, too.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but probably. But I guess the Childe Harold persona gave him just enough plausible deniability to be like, this is a character. It's not really me.
See. Right.
But also, he profited off the fact that people thought it was him. And they had good reason to think it was him because of the autobiographical details. I'll read this line from the fourth canto, which was published a few years later, but it says, "I had become weary of drawing a line which everyone seemed determined not to perceive." He's traveling around with Hobhouse, and his main motive, some people argue, for going to Europe in the first place, is to hook up with men, because it was seen more favorably in certain areas of Europe than it was in Britain. And he said Hobhouse kind of got in the way sometimes, like Byron would want to hook up sometimes, and Hobhouse was kind of this stuffy British guy who was there. And Hobhouse eventually left, and he referenced later, he's like, I think Byron was a little relieved when I left because he could now hook up with as many guys as he wanted to without me being there. But like, his first and second cantos are all about that initial grand tour. And he goes to the Ottoman Empire. And his trip to Greece seems to resonate a lot with him, and he writes a lot about it. He was very moved by the oppression of the Greek people by the Ottoman Empire, although arguably he contributed to it, because apparently, allegedly, okay. This is all alleged.
Don't sue us, Byron.
So Ali Pasha was this warlord and dictator and despot who ruled a portion of Greece in the Ottoman Empire. And he and the Brits had been fighting for a while over the Ionian Islands, which I guess consists of Corfu and places that I think of as like vacation destinations now. But anyway, Ali Pasha, this despot, had been sort of negotiating and fighting with British forces for possession of these series of islands, these Greek islands. And Britain was like, what if we send a handsome young man to Ali Pasha, and maybe some stuff happens between them, maybe not, and then he just kind of forgets that he wanted those islands, and guess what? Handsome young British man was dispatched.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
So England's... Okay, allegedly.
Allegedly. So Byron's already in Europe.
Okay.
He's hanging out with Hobhouse. They're having a great time. They're seeing the sights and doing all manner of things. And then they run into this guy called Forresty, who's this envoy for Britain, but he's kind of working both sides. He's trying to figure out some sort of deal to get Britain these islands. And he's like, Ali Pasha likes young men. I see here, young man. But Byron and Hobhouse go to meet Ali Pasha thinking it's just like a fun adventure. They're
Sure.
like, I want to meet a dictator. Sounds fun to me, you know. And what happened between them, I mean, I guess no one ever knows. I don't know if they hooked up or not. Or maybe Byron was just really charming, but either way, Britain got those islands.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Who is this Byron dude? He's like, you think you know like the craziest things about someone. You think it's like overblown, but then it's like there's just always more.
I think.
To Byron.
But then Byron, I think, felt guilty. First of all, I don't think he knew he was being prostituted by Britain. I think he went initially to just be like, this Forresty guy says Ali Pasha wants to meet us. That sounds fun, you know. Hobhouse is into history, and this will be a historical occurrence. And plus, Ali Pasha was very flattered because I could hear you're from a great family. I've always wanted to meet a nobleman, you know, from Britain and all that stuff. And I guess Byron, maybe youthful bravado, was like, I can talk to this despot. I'm sure nothing bad will happen. But I think Forresty, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, I apologize, definitely used Byron because there were troops, like British troops, not far behind them. So obviously there was some sort of correlation in at least somebody's mind between Byron's visit and getting these islands. And then Britain got the islands. But then, of course, Britain were not always very nice. That's the understatement of the last 5 centuries. Colonizers, and were very oppressive to the people of those islands. And I think Byron was like, is this my fault? Did I do this? Like, is it my fault that these people are oppressed? And arguably that's the reason, like, late in his life, he goes back and fights for Greek independence because he feels so awful about having had an unintentional...
Yeah, I mean, he definitely was not informed about what was happening.
He was being prostituted, or allegedly.
Right. Allegedly.
To this guy to get Brittany's... I don't know. But there is a part in the second canto where he kind of references it, and they make him take it out. The editor, they're like, you cannot imply that you hooked up with this guy.
Wow, even under the guise of Childe Harold.
Yeah. They make him take it out. And, but again, the speaker is very mysterious in that way, because you always get the sense that more is happening than he's saying, because sometimes he'll cut between, like, this sort of historical lamentation about how all these brave European empires have crumbled and everything's just oppressed and gross now. But then he'll cut to be like, oh, and by the way, I went to see this sultan and stuff happened. I'm not going to say what, but so it's very tantalizing as a reader.
Yeah. I mean, just the fact that people weren't sure if it was Byron but had good reason to believe it was, like, that's so much more tantalizing than it being, like, clearly Byron or, you know, I mean, that's really the only other option, I guess.
Yeah. Or just some completely fictional character.
Right. The unknown is just so much more enticing and tantalizing. So
I think you're right.
Yeah, Byron absolutely knew what he was doing there, I think. And then having it be shut off in the 4th canto, that must have been a really fun payoff for readers.
Well, he wasn't living in Britain anymore, so I guess he was kind of like, I don't really have a reputation anymore to protect, you know?
Right.
I think a lot of the first 2 cantos did feel like a slog for me to read, again, because I don't, as an American, I just don't know anything about European history, especially from the 18th, 19th century. So I'm like, I don't know what battle he's referencing here. And then in the 3rd canto, he goes off about Napoleon. Again, I do love the Emperor Napoleon, very fascinated by his life, but I don't know a lot about the individual battles that Byron is referencing. But there are some lines I want to look at, because I think there are glimmers in the first two cantos of brilliance. I don't think the first two, again, overall are very good, personally. But, like, there are moments that I think are just like, that's an interesting way to say that.
Yeah, let's look at them. Which ones are we going to go with?
Well, there's one where he talks about how to pick up women that I thought was interesting.
Okay.
This is in the second canto. Now Michi kens, I ween of woman's breast, who thinks that wanton thing is won by sighs. Who careth she for hearts when once possessed? Do proper homage to thine idol's eyes. Be not too humbly, or she will despise thee in thy suit, though told in moving tropes. Disguise even tenderness if thou art wise. Brisk confidence still best with women copes. Pique her and soothe in turn, soon passion crowns thy hopes. So kind of like negging, right?
Like negging?
Yeah.
Wait, tell me what that is.
That's why you flirt with women and then insult her.
Oh.
To get this kind of whiplash effect.
Wait, that's what he's saying he does?
Well, I think kind of. Like, disguising tenderness if thou art wise. Brisk confidence still best with woman copes. Pique her and soothe in turn. How would you... To pique her, like to irritate her, right?
Okay.
And then soothe her. So again, kind of this whiplash effect.
Okay. So you're talking like emotional manipulation?
A little bit, but in the service of flirtation.
Okay.
But that's how he says to pick a woman. That was the Lord Byron patented method.
Man. One time in high school, I had someone... Okay, so I'll try to keep the story short. But I was in choir in high school, and we shared these choral folders with like a person next to us, and I like always put it back, but I was so mad that I was the one always putting it back, and then at one point I got really mad at him for, his blatant not putting it back, and then like afterwards he like told me that he was purposely trying to agitate me so that we could be better friends. He was like, I read this thing online about agitating a friendship.
What?
Yeah. I was like, I will never talk to you again.
What? Like, make someone mad and then they'll like you.
Yeah, I mean, sure, like, I guess you feel a lot of emotions towards the person, but I don't know, I feel like just participating in that sort of emotional manipulation makes you unable to actually enjoy what true friendship is. That's what I think, anyway.
Well, I think Lord Byron...
It didn't work out for my choral partner.
No. Maybe if he had then started putting it actually away, then you would have been... Because the bar had been set so low, maybe then you would actually have started to like him, to be like, oh.
Oh, yeah. Like, women are like, I love men that do the dishes. Because the bar's just so low.
The bar is in hell. What's that thing? The bar is in hell?
The bar is in hell?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
I don't know. But again, like, as a woman, this is working on me. I'm like, he'll be like, think about all these grand empires and how they're falling. I'm like, oh, wow, Byron, you're so smart and wise. And then he'll be like, I'm cursed, I'm doomed. God hates me. And I'm like, no, you're not, Byron, I can save you. And I can imagine why when he got back to London, like, and this had been published, women were all over him. Because they just... Again, they associated him so strongly with his character he was writing, for good reason. And I guess they just... I don't know if they just missed the bisexual references, or that made him seem more dangerous and interesting. I don't know. But, like... Anyway, that's one stanza that I thought was interesting. I also think there's one where it's like... Where he loves Gothic landscapes. He loves ruins. I mean, he waxes like almost philosophical about them. He's like, look on its broken arch, its ruined wall, its chambers desolate, and portals foul. This was once ambition's airy hall, the dome of thought, the palace of the soul. This is him describing a skull. Behold, through each lackluster eyeless hole, the gay recess of wisdom and of wit, and passion's host that never brooked control. Can all sage or sophist ever writ people this lonely tower, to this tenement refit? He liked to drink out of skulls, too.
Of course he did.
Because, actually, I don't know why. He just liked to drink out of skulls.
I mean, shoot, that's like... To drink out of a skull is super privileged, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, this thing is dead. Or probably this human is dead.
Yeah. But I thought that was cool. He's just looking at the skull, the palace of the soul, the dome of thought. Behold through each lackluster eyeless hole of gay recess of wisdom and of wit. Isn't that good?
That is good.
But surrounded by all these stanzas, I'm like, eh. His mourning Greek oppression, which he arguably contributed to. But again, for most part, the first and second canto, I'm like, I could take it or leave it. This is the third one, though, that gets interesting. The third one is good.
Okay, question.
Yes.
I think maybe we call it here for this episode, because we're running on like 40 minutes already.
Right.
But, yeah.
Well, there is a huge break of time between the second canto and then when he writes the third. So I think that fits.
Oh, good. Good. All right. Thank you all for joining us for the Over Poetry Show. Good luck as you live your prosaic lives. Goodbye.
Goodbye.